Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 78. And in this episode, we wanted to talk a bit about naming characters in video games. As games have become more narratively complex and more narrative-driven, the idea that you can give every character that you control whatever name you want is, or even the notion that a character might not have a canon name, is falling more and more by the wayside. And is that an extinct facet, an extinct trope?
Yeah, it's something that was more common amongst games that had no voice acting. Although voice acting isn't the only culprit for this going away, but what led me to think of this is, as of when we're recording this, which is in the past by the time you hear it, Final Fantasy VII Remake had just come out, and in Final Fantasy VII, you could rename all your characters, but in the remake, you can't, obviously, because there's a whole slew of voice acting and a ton of changes to the game that make the characters' names integral to the plot line, and so you can't rename them, whereas in the old game, it was just replacing text, right?
Yes.
And so that had me thinking, as more games get remade or revisited or even new games come along, will that start to go away? And now in a lot of games it hasn't. Like in your Zeldas, your file name is also your character name, and for the most part up until Breath of the Wild, that was still your name because there was no voice acting, or there was minimal voice acting, or no one was referring to you by name. But it's curious how that seems to be something that was integral to gaming in an era, and now as we move past, in some places it's not anymore. My favorite game of all time, Chrono Trigger, I always rename the characters. I probably the first couple times kept the original names, but like most people, upon subsequent playthroughs, especially the 10th or 11th or 12th time, I'm like, well, I'm going to name this playthrough after all my friends, and then, you know, in this next playthrough, I'm going to name them for all the friends from the Friends TV show Friends. You know, things like that.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
You start having
like
themes,
that.
yeah.
Exactly. And I'm just curious if we're still going to see that, because obviously in games with voice acting, it makes it a little more complicated, right?
It does. And like FF7's an interesting, well, Final Fantasy's a good series to look at for that, because the first entry in the series with voice acting, Final Fantasy X, had a way of kind of mixing the two, because you could only rename one character in that game, and that was the main character, Tidus. And the way they got around that was nobody ever referred to him by name.
Nope.
And that was a facet of the plot in its way. And because it's you all of the time, you could kind of fit yourself into the idea of like, okay, you know who they're referring to. But if you spread that out across a party of playable characters, it would become more and more jarring whether they are finding clumsy ways to refer to the person without actually saying their name, or it's a thing of they are talking to them like they're named human beings or named sentient beings, but just leaving a blank whenever the name is said and it's in the subtitles. It's like doing it along that kind of natural way where you name the character and the name then just pops up in the text. It's a lot harder these days.
Yeah, but tons of games still do that. And actually, now that you mention it, and now that I think about it, there are a bunch of other games that will do that specific tactic where you can name your character whatever you want, and then they just don't say the name in the dialogue. They jump over it or sub it for something else. I mean, going to Mass Effect, character's name is first name Shepard, and so everyone calls Shepard by their last name. So you can have any first name you want. The canonical name is John Shepard, but you can name it whatever you like because they're never going to refer to you by your first name. They always refer to you by your last.
Right. And for me, there is a certain weird joy in being able to rename characters because of, especially in games where you're familiar with how the narrative goes or how the dialogue goes, you can have all kinds of fun ways to change things around. I saw something recently on some social media where someone was playing through Animal Crossing and they had named themselves Loser. So anytime there was things like, well, this showed up at my door and it had Loser written on it, so it must be for you.
Yeah.
Which normally is very nice if it's your name, but, you can make it an insult. Final Fantasy VII, one of the many myriad playthroughs I've done, I had come up with all caps weird ways to refer to everybody. And I wish I could remember all of them off the top of my head. I named Cloud who? So anytime people would refer to him like he's so mysterious when he's having an identity crisis, I am who? I renamed Aerith to Important. So her name is Important. Important prayers from the planet. Everyone's thinking about Important. Sid was No, Listen. My personal favorite and the one that really got it started was I renamed Ketshi Not a Spy.
That's good.
And that one was just comedy gold.
Yeah.
So it's a unique experience that you get in a renaming circumstance.
For sure. And we should say, if you haven't played Final Fantasy VII and you're waiting to play Remake and you don't want spoilers, there might be some in this, but minor ones. At the end of the day, we're in a weird world, right, where people are coming to Final Fantasy VII never having played it before, and so you could spoil a 20-plus-year-old game.
Yeah.
But that said, I suppose if you want zero spoilers for Final Fantasy VII and you've never played it, maybe jump ahead 2 or 3 minutes. Otherwise, you're fine, because it's all name-based. So you meet a character named Red 13, who's an experiment who's being experimented on in the Shinra facility, which I haven't gotten that far in the remake, but I assume is still in the remake. That said, his Red 13 is his experiment name. They were all colors and numbers. You find out that Red 13's real name is Nanaki from his tribe when you go back to his home in Cosmo Canyon. My favorite thing to do ever since finding that out, and the only character I would rename in 7 if I wasn't renaming everybody, was Red 13 to Nanaki when I met him. So when you get to that point in the story where his grandfather is telling him his true name and everyone goes, what? His name is Nanaki? Being surprised at a name they've been calling him since they first met him. To me, on a deep level, was very funny, even though it's not all that funny to begin with. But to me, it tickled me in the right way because it just seems so silly.
It's like goofing off with a text-to-speech app. And just being like, I'm making it say stupid things.
Pretty much. I mean, that's pretty common in Pokemon, too, actually.
Absolutely.
When people name their trainers or their Pokemon to weird, ridiculous things to mess with that.
Oh, yeah. I want to know, what did you name the rival in Pokemon Red and Blue? I want to know you, Matt, and I want to know just listeners. And, did anybody give really good ones that aren't swear words? Because there's all kinds of fun ones.
Yeah, for me, I mostly stuck to the rival's regular name. I never got that creative with Pokemon. It wasn't until much later when I watched other people play Nuzlocke campaigns and they chose weird names for their Pokemon. I was like, oh, that's a thing you can do? Yeah.
And I've definitely seen in speed runs where, whichever Pokemon it is that you're using for most of the run, you can have you rename them. Was it Oh No I? So, oh no, I used Tackle. Oh no, I used Blizzard.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, little goofy things like that. And I guess, the PS1 era was where you started getting a lot more of a certain kind of driving narrative to role-playing games and long games like that. That's not to say that the 16-bit era didn't have some amazing stories and some spectacularly immersive titles, but they still held on to that sort of vestige of you name your party, which is a very D&D Western RPG thing that got adapted to Eastern RPGs that made its way back over here. Final Fantasy VI, there was a very rare item that you could get called a rename card, where you could use it and just rename one of your characters. Imagine using that in a modern game. I am this person. I have all this history. Nope. Your name is now Butt Wipe. cool.
Right, and imagine if a modern game could like incorporate like the VO to go with it. Like they had a bunch of static names that you could choose from.
Yeah, or the like the narrative justification. There's, I guess, 16-bit graphics or whatever. There was just enough wiggle room there where you're like, we can do whatever we want. I mean, Final Fantasy IV, there was a chap named Namingway in every inn, and you could talk to him, and he would, I'm pretty sure for free, rename any and all of your characters that you wanted. Which, cool. It also, you could, if you gave one character a dumb name and you regretted it, that's fine. When I played through Final Fantasy IV with my wife, she renamed characters constantly. And for the most part, she renamed characters to superheroes from the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Nice.
And she would definitely be like, okay, I thought they were kind of a Steve Rogers, but they're really more of an Ant-Man here, whatever it was. But this came with it the unfortunate side effect that I know all the characters' names. I'd refer to them, and she'd be like, who? I have no idea who that is. I would then say whatever name she gave them, and that was still an 80% chance that she would know who I was talking about because she changed the names a couple of times. It's like the Street Fighter 2 problem. It's like Dictator versus Claw kind of thing.
Right. Trying to remember the character based on their physical attributes instead of their name, because their name could be anything at that point.
Yeah, and given that, Final Fantasy was a series that, you could change your job classes all of the time. So the fact that you could change another facet of your character isn't all that crazy.
No, and it's funny because you mentioned Western RPGs before, and like I feel like those are the few games that may allow you to change your character, like have a custom character name into the foreseeable future, because they often construct their narratives around a chosen one kind of narrative.
Yes.
So your name is less important. Like, I mean, Skyrim is the first one that comes to mind. You're the Dragonborn, and so no one calls you by your name.
Yeah, Dragon Age 3, you're the Inquisitor. Same thing.
Right. And so they call you by your title, so your name can be whatever you want it to be. And I find that interesting, but it feels also a little less personal to me. Like, and that's something I wanted to talk about. Do we feel like being able to rename your character distances you from like a closeness? Something that I feel playing the remake, as far as I've gotten so far, Final Fantasy VII, is having the solid narrative, having watched Advent Children and having experienced this game over the years as long as I have, playing Crisis Core and all these other spin-offs, there's something super key to these characters having their names, whatever their canonical names are. It's important to the story. And I feel like in a game like Dragon Age or Skyrim, I don't mind being called by my title, but it does feel a little less personal. And it's why I think those games strive to have relationship stuff in them and, like bonding quests and intimate moments, because they want you to get a sense of character, since the name can be whatever you want, through those kinds of moments. I don't know that it necessarily hurts games like that, but it does make the names feel less important if they can be whatever you want. Like, as far as I'm concerned with Mass Effect, your character's name is Shepard. The first name doesn't matter. So
right.
I don't get that disconnect there, because they're often saying your name. But I do feel that in other games where your name kind of almost doesn't matter.
Well, in a lot of those games, too, it's not just the name where you're being given a customization range. In Skyrim, in Mass Effect, in Dragon Age, you are creating your character. What race are they if it's a fantasy game? What gender? What do they look like? What are their origins? What planet are they from? What kind of background do they have? So in a case where you have a more solid-ish narrative, in the sense of like, okay, Cloud is the spiky-haired blonde guy with the big sword, who's now working as changing just his name in on the level of production value that we come to expect nowadays in a AAA title and that we are getting in the FF7 remake, it feels very much like you took a novel and just crossed out the names and wrote in your name or whatever name you wanted because you felt like it. Whereas a lot of these other more Western style RPGs or other games that allow character customization on top of, you get to name the character, there's further aspects of you can inject whether a narrative that you want or if you just want to make the character like you. Because there's also that notion of, I think the two routes we've been talking about in naming characters thus far has been self-insert or sophomoric jokes.
Right.
But there's also the idea that you are creating a certain kind of character. So you can make a character. I know you and MJ on Reignite are playing shepherds closest to yourself.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that says, I know we've never talked about this, but I'm fairly certain you've done this. You play shepherds in Mass Effect that are a certain kind of character that you want to play. It's not necessarily you're remaking Matt, but you're like, okay, this is my shepherd.
Yeah, I mean the conceit in the playthroughs for Reignite is that we play them as ourselves. Because typically I prefer FemShep, and my FemShep is usually Rain Shepherd, Rayne. And she's a redhead and a badass, and that's my preferred avatar for that game because I like the voice acting, I like the character. Though Mark Meer does a great job, you'll never beat Jennifer Hale, and I say this constantly. That said, yeah, you're right. And I think what's interesting and what I hadn't thought about is how often I do self-insert the main hero to be me, like in Final Fantasy VII and in Chrono Trigger specifically, I can think of because I played the most, where I've named myself the lead character and then named the characters based on their relationship to me as I go through the game, naming my best friend Barrett or naming my best friend Luca, like using my best friend's names instead of those characters in those versions. And you're right. I think there is a certain level of customization to put yourself in the narrative with the name changing, the customization like that. And in some games, it goes beyond choosing your name, and in some games, it's just choosing your name to create an additional narrative that you want.
Right. I mean, for me, I definitely named some main characters after myself when I was a kid, but there came a point, I'm not sure exactly when, but it was before I became an adult, that I sort of fell out of doing it. Even in games where you are expected to come up with a name for the character, I would just have other naming conventions that I would use. I think some of it for me is the fact that it's always such a weird moment seeing my own name in writing. Mm-hmm. Okay, you see the name Geoff plenty, but anytime I see it spelled the way mine is with a G, that my brain kind of pings it for a moment in a way that I'm not sure others with either more common names or names more commonly written down you would see. It's I don't see it every day. So when I name a character Geoff, I don't know, there's just this odd sort of like, oh, what? It throws me off. I don't know. It's like having a dog where there's a doorbell sound in a game where it sounds like your doorbell and you're just confusing the poor thing. And yes, I am insulting myself in this. So there just came a point where I'm like, the character's not named Geoff. I got to come up with something else. Sometimes it's normal. Sometimes it's weird. Sometimes it's whatever. I will name files Geoff or Jeffrey because that's just... whose file is this? Whose Tony Hawk career is this? It's Geoff's. Well, except for the fact that both my original save files for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2, I successfully screwed up spelling my name in entering them because of just the way the name entry screen was. So one of them is Geoffr.
Nice.
And the other one is Jeffrey, where I accidentally hit Q instead of O, and it's been so long that I'm not sure how I did that. I know how the first one screwed up. I like hit start when I meant to hit circle, and it's just like now saving. Oh, I'm not done. The Q, I am not sure at this point how I did that. But as far as characters go, I have various things that I typically do.
Well, I think that's a fair point, and honestly, the more I think about it, the more that I've often used my own custom handle of either Cyrus, Cyruss, aping the Chrono Trigger Cyrus, but adding an S to be original, finger quotes. I would often use or Stormageddon, which as long as I can fit all those characters, which is only half of Nintendo's games, I will name my character Stormageddon. Like in the newest Pokemon, I'm Stormageddon because there was enough room to put it. However, in Animal Crossing, I had to be Storm because I couldn't fit it. And so things like that. But that said, it occurs to me something I've never done, and I don't know why I never did it until this day, but like I've never used the name of characters from other RPGs in different RPGs. For example, I'm replaying through Final Fantasy VII now on the Switch, although I've paused to play the remake, and I will probably go back to the original after I finish the remake. Whatever, don't at me. It's a lot of 7. I'm very obsessed right now.
Absolutely no judging here.
The point is, though, I could have played through the original 7, naming all the characters after Chrono Trigger characters, and also, like, the next time I play Chrono Trigger, do the same thing. And I don't know why I've never done that, but it's something that's just occurred to me, is like, why not just sub in names of characters from other games that I really like, so I can have them in this game and kind of play with like, well, which character is most like that character from the other game, so I could have them be similar.
Yeah, you get to see them in a new context. It's a very what's in a name when the names for all of your RPG characters are atypical, non-Western style names. You know, if you run into any other character in a game with the name of Cloud, that's got a very specific connotation there. So, yeah, you give somebody else the name Tifa, the name Barrett, the name Squall, the name Frog. You are giving a very certain suggestion there. And it's funny how there are games now, in kind of going back to the idea of like, is this an extinct form, where they will ask you for a name entry and you can put in a name, almost expecting that you put in your own name. But that's not what the name of the main character is, and it becomes another facet of the gameplay experience. That has happened in older generations, and that has happened in recent years as well. One that leaps to mind is Undertale.
Yep.
Where at the start you play as one character through the whole game. It's not like you get a party or anything. And at the start of the game, it asks you to name the fallen child. And you fall through a hole in a mountain and end up in the world of monsters. So you name the fallen child. And because it's just you, and there's a lot of second-person narration in how you interact with objects, you look in a mirror and it's like, despite everything, it's still you. You don't really hear instances of your avatar being called your name. And you find out later that you're not the first child to have fallen. And the name that you give the fallen child is the first child, not the one you're playing. And that is some spoilers, but also how that affects your story and how that affects the story of the child you're playing, that part's up to you. And if you've already played the game, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, I apologize for the minor spoilers there, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah, and also definitely play Undertale if you haven't played it yet.
Very much so.
But what's interesting about that is then in Toby Fox's follow-up game, Deltarune, at least Chapter 1, which is the only part that's out right now, they ask you to do all the same things, name your character, and then after going through all of that customization, they throw it aside and say, well, none of that matters because you don't get to make choices. And which is kind of the opposite feeling of Undertale, and which is also a really interesting play on name this character, doesn't matter, that's not his name, which is kind of a direct reference to itself, but also all other RPGs that came before it.
Yeah, And even that idea of, you get to design yourself. No, you don't. In life, you don't get to design yourself. Here you are. Figure it out. Even non-RPG games have been able to do this. Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Early on in the plant chapter, you have to check into a computer node in order to activate the radar so you can see where guard movements are. It's very useful. And when you first check in, you almost set your profile. You write your name, you write your birthday, your blood type if you know it. You can pick at random if you want, stuff like that. It doesn't change how Raiden is referred. Raiden is still Raiden. He's still Jack, depending upon who's talking to him. But at the end of the game, spoilers, I'm giving the warning at the beginning now. At the end of the game, Snake notices the dog tags that Raiden is wearing, and he looks at them. And as a close-up, it's all the information you entered at the start of the game hours ago. And after a severe trip of a mind screw of a game about the notion of choice and control and inevitability and free will and everything else, there's your name on the character you've been playing the entire time, even though you were never called that. Snake asks Raiden if he recognizes the name, and Ryan just goes, "Never heard of him before." Throws the dog tags away, and at that point, you've completely lost control of Raiden. You don't control him again for the rest of the game. There's other little narration things, but for the most part, that's kind of where you stop even getting to see Raiden. So there's this weird moment of, yes, your name is in here. That's important, so that we can have this symbolic gesture of the fictional character, the digital avatar, getting rid of you to live their narrative, whatever that is. You don't get to see it now.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even further back RPGs, Earthbound very infamously utilized the name you enter at the beginning in a very potent way towards the end of the game. That's one I'm not going to spoil at all. I'm just going to say it's a hell of a moment.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is where games choose to use that kind of personalization, because there's something about using names versus all the other customization that I feel like is personal on a different level. I think also what's really interesting is, for me anyway, naming characters, it depends on the game to determine what I name them. Like if I'm playing something like Animal Crossing, I want to name the character after me because I've decided this is me. This is an avatar for me in this cute little relaxing world, right? And so it's pretty simple for me to name a character after myself. Same for a game like The Sims or any kind of real like simulation game or something that's close to real life. Like in Rock Band, I would always create a character named after me, and then I would create alternate universe versions of myself with different names that sort of looked similar but had like different outfits or maybe even were different genders.
Matt Storm and the Matt Storms.
Well, actually, canonically, and Joe, if you're listening, you'll appreciate this. Canonically, all of my bands in all of the Rock Band games and Guitar Hero games are called Mega Boobs with an exclamation point, because when I got for the first Guitar Hero, and we might have talked about this on our rhythm game episode.
I don't think we did.
When I got Guitar Hero, I was sitting with my friend Joe, and I couldn't figure out what to name my band. Like, it was too much pressure because I was such a music nerd. I was like, I don't know a good band name. And so he suggested that, and I used it. And then it just canonically became the band name I used for every rhythm game after that. In fact, many years later, when Rock Band came out, we competed, me, Joe, and two other friends competed in a Rock Band tournament to win a copy of the game, and we won. And our team name was Mega Boobs.
Mega Boobs.
Which, when the announcer had to announce the winner, let out such a sigh of, oh God, I can't believe I have to say this out loud, which was very fulfilling.
Bar trivia gone horribly wrong. I love it.
But all that said, it's weird that I would put such pressure on naming a band, yet naming characters I can do kind of willy-nilly and not think about it. But I find that if I'm playing a game like a Zelda or, any kind of action game, I am less likely to name the character after myself than if I'm playing something that's closer to simulating reality or is non-fantastical, at least, like a Rock Band or an Animal Crossing. Do you have a similar thing, or is it just a case-by-case basis for you?
It can be a little bit case by case. I definitely think of, we mentioned Pokemon before. Like I said, I don't think I've named a Pokemon trainer Geoff in a very long time, because now my friend Sherwin, when he plays Pokemon, every different game, every different avatar he sees as distinct characters, he gives them a different name, and they've got their own narrative and story going on that, yes, has to do with the narrative and story of that particular entry in the series, but they have different favored Pokemon types and different goals that they're trying to do within the game, which is supremely cool, gotta say. And when he told me about that, when we were talking about this, I realized that I kind of do that. And after talking to him, I focus that a bit more in my Pokemon playthroughs. I very often, when I have to give a singular character, a singular file, a name, like I said, I don't use Geoff anymore. Much like how you use Cyrus, I will name my characters Onion, like the vegetable. I started doing that because at one point in my video game playing life, I was obsessed with Parappa the Rapper, with Chop Chop Master Onion. Mm-hmm. I was playing like NES emulators on my family's computer, and the wide world of emulators and ROMs. I was finding English patches for games, and it was like, oh man, Final Fantasy III, the original one for the Famicom. And when you start that, your base job class, whether it's freelancer or whatever, you were called an Onion Kid, which has since come around to Onion Knight in other Final Fantasy titles. And just for whatever reason, that stuck with me. And I was also noticing at that point that in like manga and anime, groups of characters would be named under similar conventions, and very often they were food puns or food titles.
Right.
Like the entire Saiyan race in Dragon Ball Z.
Exactly.
And a group of kids on Usopp's Island in One Piece and a bunch of stuff. So I'm like, yeah, Onion. And so when I'm at a loss, I will name characters after root vegetables just because that works. And so even though all of my Pokemon trainers are usually named Onion, they all have different arcs that I give them. And a lot of that comes to whatever Pokemon it is that I catch along the way that just seems to like take me. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is this Onion's favorite. And team can be built around that, can work with that, can roll with that. And I didn't do a ton of Rock Band, surprisingly enough. So I don't have like a regular like band name or group name that I use. There are definitely times where like I have to name a character that I like run into trouble. I very recently, well, not very recently, but I've been playing through Persona 3 for the first time, which I've mentioned on this show. And at the beginning of that, you have to name your character. Like there's a name entry at the dorm where you start living. And there isn't quite a canonical name for that protagonist in Persona 3. The other, Persona 4, there's a more canonical name for the protagonist. I haven't played 4 yet, but I know this. 3 has, depending upon which outside the game media source you look at, I think there's 3 different kinds, so I couldn't fall back on that. I tried, actually, for the first time in many, many years, being like, all right, I'm Geoff Moonin. Okay, that's who I'm going to be. And it was too weird, so I started again. And I'm like, well, Onion I got to give him a first name and a last name. I've never given Onion a last name before. This feels stupid. So now I am going through Tartarus with my group of friends as Solid Snake.
All right.
Which is great. I mean, because when people refer to me by name, it's Snake-kun. It's great.
I mean, when in doubt, take a name from elsewhere if you're not satisfied with your options in front of you.
Yeah, and that's a fun little all of the games you talked about thus far, there's a fun collation of it. I took a character from another game, a game that I really like, put them in a new setting. We talked a bit about Metal Gear Solid. We'll see how this goes. And also, I screwed up the name entry. Rather than it being Solid Snake, I don't remember how I screwed this up. I put in solid space SN, and then I think it was because I just entered it in solid space snake, and there's 2 lines of dashes, and the first line is the first name, the second line is the last name. So the first name is solid space SN, and his last name is Ake. Okay.
All right. I mean, as far as strange names go, it's not the strangest name.
It's up there. I know what it's supposed to be. And I'm not streaming this or anything, so he's Solid Snake.
My question is, in the newest Pokemon, you have Sword or Shield, right?
I do. I have Sword.
So in Sword, is your Pokemon trainer named Onion?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to confirm that because you talked about past games, and I wanted to make sure that even currently and canonically, you're still Onion. And it's funny because you keep saying that you're naming things Onions, and as a Steven Universe fan, I'm just like, did you predict the future of a character named Onion in Steven Universe?
Also, that happened, and you know what? I often name my mute player characters that are kind of sociopaths when you really break down what RPG characters are like. Yeah, I kind of did.
You kind of did see the future. I think that's pretty funny.
Here we are in the future.
I mean,
and it's Onion.
But also, you mentioned that, and it makes me think of Breath of Fire 3, I believe. There's actually an Onion warrior, an Onion character named Peko, P-E-C-O, that I think you can rename. And so it would be very meta if you ever play that game to name that character Onion, since he is literally a tiny onion warrior.
Oh, yeah. So that's just one of those... I like having weird... naming conventions in my back pocket. I've definitely named, back when I played World of Warcraft, I would name my World of Warcraft characters after bastardizations of classical composers.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, because you would just get away with it. I'd name someone Berlioz, and there'd be no, no, can't name him that. That's accepted. Really? I had a blood elf warlock for a while named Maninoff. For Rachmaninoff. There'd be fun things like that. And it's all right. Because otherwise I would run into the situation of, what do you name this character you'll be spending dozens, hundreds of hours with? God, I don't know. So... yeah, it's nice to have back pocket names.
Well, it's funny that you bring up MMOs because I feel like that's the place where a lot of the time names seem the least important, right? Because you're designing this giant hundreds and hundreds of hours online game. So if you make the name too important, how will you fit it in? I think, and games with voice acting have done it too. I mean, Star Wars: The Old Republic, which I played for a long time, was fully voice acted. But whenever they would refer to your character, they would skip over the name. And the dialogue was framed in a way that the name wasn't required to the context of whatever sentence they were saying.
Yeah, it's handy when you have an alternate identity by which you can be referred, back to the whole Dragonborn thing or Knights of the Old Republic. BioWare mostly.
Yeah, well, actually, that reminds me, in the Creator Wrestler for all of the early wrestling games, later on they would have pre-programmed names that you could choose from that were actual people's names that you could kind of mix and match. But in the early years, you would just pick a descriptor name, and that would be what the announcer would say when you'd come out. Your name would be Matt Storm, but you would choose the title The Warrior. And so every time Jim Ross announced you, he would be and coming down to the ring, here comes the Warrior. So they had some pre-programmed VO for the announcers in the game, even though that wasn't your actual character's name.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely remember playing around with that in some of the old Creator Wrestler stuff. And those are fun too, because there again, the entire point is how you fashion the character, whether it is putting yourself into the game or you're recreating a comic book character. How many of us haven't tried to put Wolverine into a wrestling game? I mean, really.
Right.
or your favorite Marvel character, whether you want it to be the Hulk or Captain America or someone obscure. So, I mean, that's another way of getting around it. That's another way of doing it.
Yeah, I actually had in Rock Band 1 and 2, I don't remember if in Rock Band 3 I was able to recreate them, but I had a DC Villains band. I forget what the band name was, but it was, with the help of my friend John, I created Two-Face, the Joker, Bane, and maybe Mr. Freeze as a 4-person rock band in Rock Band, just based on the outfits that they had within the game.
Nice.
Or to make Two-Face, I did like a half-face tattoo thing that covered half his face. Like it was pretty neat, and like they looked surprisingly like those characters. The game let you get pretty close. And so I would do crazy things like that too in other games where you can create your own character. Like I found that when you create your own character, I would often want to create something out of my imaginations more than creating myself. Whereas when naming characters in games where you can't create what they look like, I was more inclined to use my own name, which seems weird. Like I said, if it's a life simulator, I'm often using my own name, but like something like Rock Band or a wrestling game, I'd rather create something that either exists already that shouldn't be there, that would be funny, or something completely fantastical from my mind that I think would look really cool in that situation.
And I think there's probably a deeper conversation there about wanting to see oneself in a game, seeing oneself in narrative, feeling seen, feeling represented. You know, I grew up playing a lot of RPGs, and you know the amount of redheaded heroes there are? I'm already seen. That's fine.
Yeah.
And I imagine for others, it's great to, you know, if you don't see your name often in a story or with a character, that you want to see that more often. Me, it just made me feel weird. For others, I'm sure it's quite the opposite or somewhere in between. I mean, in our Create a Character episode a while back, there's that notion of you get that control and then you get to see the kind of representation or people you want to see in the digital landscape. So these are our habits. What are yours, listeners?
Yeah, if you have a go-to name you use for creating custom named characters, let us know. Or your go-to, do you never change the characters? I know plenty of people who, when broached with the option of changing the canonical names in an RPG, they panic and go, no, that's their name. I can't fuck with that. That's not right. Which is perfectly fine as well. But if you have like go-to custom names that you use, or you always use your own name, like I'm curious. I know we have folks who listen who are big RPG players, so I'd love to know your thoughts behind that. Because I think at the end of the day, this isn't an extinct form of customization. I think as long as games either have custom voice acting or no voice acting, we will have trends like that, or they will find other ways for you to customize, even if it's not with a name.
Right, and as game narratives grow to be more intriguingly meta or have the opportunity to be so, this is too fertile of ground to pass over. So whether it's fitting into a larger big budget narrative or being utilized to allow us to invest a little more of ourselves before things are turned around on us, I agree, Matt. I think the conclusion is this isn't extinct. It is evolving, however. So let us know some of yours. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know incidents that you've had where you were at a loss for words and you gave them a stupid name. Last little anecdote. One time I was playing Final Fantasy VII. My brother happened to be in the room. Sid joined my party and I'm like, I want to rename him. What should I name him? My brother gave me a litany of really stupid names. Absolutely intentionally asinine names. And the one that I thought was the least bad was Sock Boy. And so Sid was Sock Boy for the rest of the game. And that has stuck with me for more than a decade. So thank you, Chris. Hope you're enjoying Final Fantasy VII.
That's great. Yeah, and if you want to know where the best place is to engage in this conversation, we have a lot of places, but honestly, I think the best place is over on our Discord server. If you go to certainpov.com, there's a permanent link to our Discord server. We're also going to repost that link on social media in the coming weeks, just because I want to make sure, although this will be in the past by the time you hear that, but that's besides the point, because I want to make sure that we pull the community over there. We love interacting anywhere you want to interact, but I ideally want to keep the conversation going on Discord where everyone can see it, whether you're a friend of the podcast or a complete stranger or someone brand new to the show, it's a great place to go and have this discussion. So again, certainpov.com, you can find a permanent invite link to our Discord server. Come chat with us.
And you can check out all of the other great shows that we have on the network, and we've added a few new ones, so why don't you check it out? You might find a new favorite. But as always, this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
It all started with a mouse, and in the last 100 years, the magic of Disney has filled our homes and hearts and defined generations. Join the Doe Up in Dreams podcast as they take a deep dive into the Disney vault and examine the history, artistry, controversy, and even drama behind your favorite Disney films with host Maddie Limerick. With guests ranging from Imagineers, Broadway stars, voice actors, and even your favorite certain POV hosts. You'll want to tune in each episode to see what magic they'll dig up next. Find out more at certainpov.com and wherever you find podcasts.
CPOV.
certainpov.com.